Everybody, my name is Eric Brock, and I serve as president of AUSG, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's AU Community Forum. Today, you're going to have an engaging conversation amongst admin and students alike, and I'd like to welcome our president, President Burwell. It is my pleasure to introduce Sylvia Matthews Burwell. Since coming to AU in 2017, she has focused on building a university community centered on scholarship, learning, and service. She launched American University's 5-year strategic plan, Changemakers for a Changing World. In 2018, AU became the largest higher education institution in the United States to achieve carbon neutrality. And US News & World Report recently ranked AU number 25 in undergraduate teaching, number 35 in innovation, 43rd in first-year experiences, and 11th in study abroad programs. President Burwell previously served as the 22nd Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, where she oversaw the successful implementation of the Affordable Care Act and led the department's responses to the Ebola and Zika outbreaks. Before that, she served as the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, working with Congress to negotiate a 2-year budget deal following the 2013 government shutdowns. President Burwell has also served as president of the Global Development Program and chief operating officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and president of the Walmart Foundation. She earned undergraduate degrees from Harvard University and Oxford University, where she was a Rhodes Scholar. She's a native of Hinton, West Virginia, and she and her husband, Stephen, are the proud parents of 2 young children. Please join me in welcoming President Sylvia Burwell.
Eric, thank you so much for that introduction, but also thank you for all the work that you and the entire SGA team do on behalf of our other students. Before I hop in, I want to just pause for a moment, and I'm sorry that we need to pause, but I think it is important that we once again recognize that a portion of our community is suffering today. And at this time, and I think it is important to recognize that a number of families right now have lost loved ones in the last days, and connected to many of the things that we have seen over a period of time in terms of our Asian American and Pacific Islander community, in terms of what they have been seeing. And we know that there has been an increase in events, and certainly the events that occurred over the last days have been tragic for the individuals and their families, but also we know bears down on our community. So I did want to just make sure that we take a moment to pause and reflect and reflect our support for our community before we started our session today. So thank you all, and I know each of you can think about ways that you can support members of the community individually. So thank you. And I also want to thank Tim, can you wave? Tim Schmeling, and Kevin Gold. Tim is here on behalf of our Student Bar Association, and Kevin represents the Graduate Leadership Council, and want to thank you all for joining us. And I also want to thank all the students that are here. I know it's a busy time, and so really appreciate you all being here today. And I also just want to start this with a huge thank you for your patience, for your perseverance, and your determination over the last year, which has been a hard year for everybody, both personally as well as what you all do professionally, which is your academic work in school. And I've missed seeing all of you, and from sunny days on the quad. Today is not one of those sunny days for those of you who are not here in DC, to games and matches in Bender, to running into people when I walk to work or even on my weekend runs. I really miss seeing you all, and I can't wait for us all to be back. And I think that day is now coming, and we are seeing that that day is coming. And that's a big part of what today's session is about. And as I outlined in the AU Community Forum, I think we've been ramping, but I think our ramp slope just picked up. And, as we've heard the good news, even since I've done the Community Forum, I think we've gotten much better news about vaccines and vaccine access and what we can expect from that. And I think that's a great thing. I think it'll be important for all of us, though, to keep wearing our masks and taking the steps that we need to take as we are on that trajectory. So I know there's light at the end of the tunnel, And that's a good thing. And that's a big part of what we're talking about today. And this session builds on that previous session, which was for the whole community. And we want to make sure we're communicating about where we are, what we know and what we don't know, as well as have an opportunity to hear your questions and your input. And it informs our next steps as we go on. And this is what we've been doing all along. I think everybody remembers 3 principles. Number 1, health and safety of the AU community. Number 2, how do we best achieve our core mission of scholarship and learning? And number 3, how do we contribute to the broader community? Those are our core principles. That's what we're working against. We've been learning about the pandemic. We've learned from our other colleague institutions as well. We, are learning and listening to make sure we shape what we're doing. And as we've done all this and made it through this year, I can't not remind us of momentum. Eric, in his introduction, went over a number of elements of the momentum that we have. Not going to repeat those, but actually do want to focus on some of the student momentum that's continued this year that some of you may or may not know about. Zizan Luo and Tammy Nguyen have both been selected as prestigious Wrangell Fellows. And it's the first time in AU's history that we've had 2 at once. 3 of our CAS students, Joseph Minnick, Joey Lambourne, and Monisha Jayabalam, recently took home top prizes at NASA's DC Space Grant Consortium Student Research Competition, and they're going to be published as undergrads in the Inspired Journal. So they will have their names and publications related to those. And also I want to mention Mia Owens, one of our CAS graduate students. She was selected as the inaugural fellow of the White House Historical Association and AU's Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center's 2-year fellowship to study the history of slavery in the White House and Washington, D.C. So I'm not going to keep going because we want to hear from you. I do want to make sure I introduce folks. I want to make sure that I introduce Dr. Fanta Aw. Fanta, I think she needs no introduction, our Vice President of Campus Life and Inclusive Excellence. Peter Starr, our Acting Provost and Chief Academic Officer. Matt Bennett, the Vice President and Chief Communications Officer. And Dan Nichols, who's the Associate Vice President of Safety and Transportation Programs and has worked on our COVID team that Fanta has led. Dan has been an important part of that. I'm going to turn things over, but before I do just want to make sure that I close this opening remarks by just saying thank you for your resiliency, your grit, all of those things that everybody talks about. That's what it's taken to get through this year. And I believe our students and our community, that's how we have gotten through this year thriving. It is through that community and through the work of each of you as individuals and how you have behaved and been a part of a broader community. And so that is why I think we are on that trajectory, why we could talk about thriving as we were, and we want to continue on that path, and part of that is being a community, and that's what we want to hear about today. So I'm going to turn things over to Fanta and Peter.
Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, Fanta. I just want to say to everybody, reiterate what Sylvia said, and thank you for your resilience and your patience as we work through the online modality this past year. The community has really come together in ways. I've been at AU now going on 12 years, and the community has never come together in ways that it begins to match what we've come together with in the face of COVID-19. But what I really want to stress with you is just how excited our faculty is to be with you in person. We are planning an in-person fall. You'll hear more about that. Every single member of the faculty that I speak to says how delighted they are to be back in person and back working with you face to face. So we'll talk more about some of the plans around that, but that's the main message I want to convey.
I just want us to jump right into the questions. And the only thing I would say to the students who are joining us, I know not everyone is joining us from DC. You may be all around the country and the world. I hope you and your families are safe. And I look forward to the conversation ahead.
All right, are we ready for the questions? Very good. All right, thank you all. So we're going to have a selection of questions that came in advance that are coming in through the Q&A function, and a couple of questions from Eric, Tim, and Kevin. As a reminder, you can always send your questions or comments to fallfeedback@american.edu. That's a really important and helpful way to collect input from the community. We review everything that comes into that inbox, and bringing the information into our planning processes. So thank you to everyone who has sent information into that, and please continue to do so. So I will turn to the first question, which is about health and safety. So Fanta and Dan, this is very much directed to you. Can you talk a little bit about the health and safety guidance when we are back on campus? Can you talk about masks and testing and our approach to vaccinations as we go forward now with students on campus in the mid-semester residential experience, and then as we look towards the fall and the return to full in-person operations?
Matt, I couldn't hear. Was that for me?
Yes, that's.
How about I start?
Yeah, so,
what was it? Yeah, I think.
Why don't I start us off? I'll start us off, and then we'll turn to Fanta and Dan, just because I think the framing of this is important. And a couple points about the framing. I think, I laid out the principles, and those principles are what we've been making decisions on as we've gone through. The other thing that's been a really important thing, and this comes a little more from my HHS time, is remembering that as we think about a pandemic, remembering prevention, detection, and response. And I think it would have been helpful to the whole nation had we had that as a framing up front, because as you think about each piece and which of the things, whether it's the masks or the vaccines, and where that fits into it. And that's a very important part of how we have put our plans together as we think through what we're doing going forward. And we've had the health and safety of the community front and center as we have done all of this decision making. And we've done this in the context of making sure we have the science, and we're informed by the science, but also informed by the experiences. We're in touch on a constant basis with other universities and with the DC Public Health Department to make sure that we are using the best information and the experiences of others to shape and frame what we do. And Fanta, I'll turn to you and Dan to speak a little more to some of the specifics, and if you want to, I can come back.
So, I think, again, with the health and safety, and as we move into the fall, I think what we have to keep reminding everyone is we have to work closely with the Department of Health, and we have to follow the guidelines that are coming from the Department of Health. So they really will set the parameters for, some of the things that can be done and how they can be done. And then certainly in addition to that, we are always looking to the CDC guidelines as well. And it goes without saying that the guidelines continue to evolve. And so we're trying to make sure that we stay on track with that, and that we are really trying to implement what are the best practices. So that's, I think, the core piece here is that, wherever our decisions land, it has to land in alignment with Department of Health, and then also following the science and the guidelines. There are a couple of things that I think, students have been asking, and I know Eric, you and I have had some conversations about it along with Tim and others and Kevin. Some of the things that students want to anticipate in coming back, like what are the things that we can anticipate? Yes, we will all be wearing masks. Yes, we need to. We should anticipate that, I think that's something we should anticipate. To the questions of how will physical distance work, we will follow the guidelines that are there. We should anticipate some of it, how much of it and what will it look like? Again, we'll know more as time progresses. So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at. We also know that as we come back into community, this is something we haven't talked about. But again, because we're having the conversation in this all of you students, I think all of us will have a very different kind of transition, right? Because in some ways we've been for a year, engaging in very different ways and socializing in very different ways. And as we come back as a community, how we interact with each other and what will that look like? I think we can anticipate that there'll be transition. And some of it will come with anxiety. Let's just be honest about that. It will come with some anxiety and trepidations, something to expect and something I think for all of us to be aware of. But ultimately, we're going to put health and safety first. So questions are already coming in about vaccines, and what will we do about vaccines? And I'll let President Burwell talk a little bit more about some of that as well. But yes, those are all the things that are front and center of our minds. And we want to make sure that as our community come back, the community is coming back in a very healthy and safe environment. Classroom space, what is it going to look like? What may the distance look like? Those are things we'll be taking into account. When you go into the dining room and you need to eat, what will that look like? I doubt very seriously that we're going to have buffets. You know, TDR buffets, not anytime soon, right? You'll probably need to be served when you're going in, and that's going to be part of what we're going to get into. And in some ways, there's some things we're going to accelerate pretty quickly. Other things we will want to make sure we ramp slowly for the sake of health and safety. And that will be the balance that we'll want to strike as we work with students and as we continue to get input about the community. Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, thank you, Fanta. I think some of the baseline things that we're going to continue to do is increased cleaning. So we'll continue through the fall to have increased cleaning of horizontal surfaces and high touch areas like elevator buttons and door handles and things of that nature. We've already increased the amount of airflow into our buildings. So we're bringing in additional outside air into our buildings. And we've increased the filtration of our buildings with very high standard filters through the system. So those baseline things that we had anticipated putting in line for fall 2020 are going to move forward now to fall 2021. So if you want to get a general idea of what we're planning for fall 2020 that we're going to build off of, you can go online and see that plan, which was vetted by the DC Office of Planning and DC Department of Health. And as Fanta said, this is still evolving. So some of the things that we're going to continue to look at are physical distancing and see if that can be amended as more information comes forward and we learn more about the impact of vaccines on how we're going to socialize in a setting such as universities.
All right. Well, thanks, Dan. That's a good segue to the next question. We've received a lot of questions about vaccines. So President Burwell, why don't we come to you in terms of will vaccines be required for students, faculty, and staff on campus? And will the university be tracking them? What is our approach to vaccinations?
So right now, we have not determined, the one thing that I can tell you what our policy is right now, which is if you are eligible and you can get a vaccine, we encourage you to do that, whether you are staff, faculty, or students. If you have a health condition as a student, most of our students wouldn't be of the age, some might from a graduate perspective. But right now, what I would say is anyone who is eligible, I would encourage you to do that. As soon as my mother could get the vaccine, I've encouraged all of our cabinet, myself, all of us, as soon as you are eligible, please get the vaccine. That's the most important thing, and that is what I would say is the university policy right now. With regard to the specific question of are we going to require and are we going to track? I think we're going to divide as we're thinking about the answer to that question. Right now, we think it is a little premature to land exactly because what is happening is we are finding out more and more information about accessibility. So as we started this, I mean, when we had the first one of these sessions, I didn't think I'd get a vaccine, you know, or people, even our students younger than I am, would be eligible to get vaccines until August, September. It looks like now we're going to have all adults eligible in May. And so that changes the dynamic. We're going to think about this in terms of the staff and the faculty and the students. We'll think about both populations. We may come out with this, a different answer or the same answer. As we think about it right now, all the vaccines are under emergency use authorization. Therefore, we couldn't require. At this point, we can't require. You wouldn't require when it is under emergency use authorization. It is our expectation that all of the vaccines, Moderna, Pfizer, J&J, will all move to the place where there will be access to vaccines that are not under emergency use authorization. But the question of whether or not we will require and who we will require is a question we have not yet answered. This is a place where it will be helpful to get input. I had a faculty breakfast just yesterday and heard from that. I have student breakfasts and we're hearing from people. If you could please use that site that Matt mentioned, the fall feedback, let us know your all's thinking about that. There are obviously health and safety concerns. Others have concerns around privacy and issues of that in terms of how we think through the requirement and the tracking issues. But we're going to work on this as we have using our core decision making in terms of the health and safety of the community. as well as listening to the community as we go forward. Fanta, I don't know if you want to add to that. And as soon as we have answers, we'll get them to you. As soon as we get to the place where, because there is some confirmation, which is, are we going to get out of the emergency use authorization? And are you all as students, because that's who's on this session, so that's what we're focused on here. Are you as students really going to have access? Are you going to be able to get that access? When they say it's open to everyone, I mean, even if people are 65 or older, they know you have to, you have to get the appointment. And so we really need to understand what access will mean as part of this decision making. Fanta, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure, no, and I think two things. Again, I think for any student who is under 26, if you've been at AU for more than a year, you know that we already have a process in place for vaccinations, because DC has a requirement, right, that you have to meet the MMR, vaccines. And so through our Student Health Center, we already have mechanisms in place on how to make sure people have the right vaccination if it ended up being that that's something that we decide to implement, and also how we track that through the medical record systems and all of that. So we do have that for students, faculty and staff. This would be a first. And so coming up with the mechanisms will be important. So the other thing also that I think will also come up is, as more and more of you are reading up about the vaccines, is also what's the efficacy period of the vaccines, right? And will there be a need for a booster and all of these things? So we will continue to very closely track all of these different elements, and we will be able to make sure that we are again in alignment with DC Department of Health, CDC, and others, and institutions will continue to compare notes, et cetera. I think that's going to be important. Questions have come up about testing and vaccines. And the answer is categorically yes. If you've only gotten your first dose, you must continue. You should continue with testing. And then once you've gotten your second dose after the 14-day period, we recommend that you continue with testing, because we know that people, even if the viral load is low, you're still shedding the virus. And because not everybody is vaccinated, we want to make sure that because we're doing screening in testing, that we can catch these quickly, and we can continue to work with our community. So as President Burwell said, more to come, but know that we're tracking that very closely.
I just so we're also, while we're on the health stuff, is the surveillance testing is extremely important. It's something that, if you'll look back to my comments from a year ago, that I said it is a place where I disagreed with CDC from the beginning. And that obviously has changed and evolved, but the surveillance testing is extremely important. And that's what Dr. Alfonso was just talking about in terms of why we believe we need to keep that up. This gets to prevention, detection, and response with an asymptomatic illness, an illness where you can't see the symptoms. Doing surveillance testing and then containing that through the quarantine and isolation that's required is how you prevent spread. And we've seen at other universities who've been doing a good job, but then have a ramp up in the case counts. Often that is when you're not doing true surveillance testing. You could have it with surveillance testing, but you do reduce the likelihood that that's going to happen. And so that's been an important part. That's why you all know we now have a lab. We don't have a medical school, but we now have a testing lab that American University has, T3 Shield. That's, as those who know, we're switching over to do that testing. That'll be an important part of health and safety on the community.
Great, thank you all. We've got a lot of questions about fall, but before we come to that, there's an even more timely question that a number of people have written in, and Kevin, it's the question you're going to ask. So why don't I turn to you?
Sure, thanks, Matt, and thanks everyone for inviting me today. It's nice to see everyone. So my question is about graduation. I know an announcement went out a couple weeks ago, but if President Burwell, if you could further elaborate on how you envision graduation day or weekend looking like at this point, and when can we expect confirmation on certain events? Thanks.
So I think everybody knows what we announced is we will be doing obviously a virtual commencement that everyone will participate in, and the schools will be doing their pieces. The part that we have not been able to confirm is the question of, can we have some face-to-face component, and what would it look like? Right now, we are, this is one where the district government will have a very important say, both in terms of our ability to do it and how we do it. So we have put together designs that we're trying to get the district basically to approve. Because right now, a gathering, even if we break you all into groups, smaller groups, we're talking about groups that are large enough that, the one thing I can say is, I hate to say this, but I don't think we can't do a situation where parents and others will be able to attend. But what we're trying to do is design something where you all could walk, right? That part of it, that you could walk. And I will be there. In the design that we put together, I'm going to be there, and your dean's going to be there. In terms of the two people that will be there, we will see if we can add other pieces and parts and be fully distanced, because most likely we're going to have to do it inside, because if we planned it outside and we had rain, and people had made all these plans and then we couldn't do it. So those are the things we're thinking about. I hope that gives you a sense of it, but I am going to be honest, we are going to have to wait for the district to feel comfortable. A number of the other institutions aren't in the area, are not trying to have a face-to-face component. Sometimes when it happens in groups, we can all get our things approved. So we're working on it with the district, but that gives you a sense. Parents won't be able to be here, I think, but what we are trying to do is create the ability for you to walk in terms of that, going across and being individually recognized for your work. That's what we're trying to get to. So hopefully, we can. But right now I can't promise it, and we don't exactly know when we'll have the decision. We know it's important for your all's planning, and so we're pushing and working, but we don't have that answer yet, and that's what the critical path issue is.
And also just to remind once again that we know that not everybody can make it to DC, even assuming that it's possible. And that is the other reason why we have the virtual commencement, because we have students all around the country and all around the world, and not everybody can afford the expense or everything and so forth. So it's really important for us to kind of keep that in mind as well.
And we will continue to figure out, for those who aren't able to, even if we are able to, how at other times that we create experiences. And maybe someone couldn't be here now, but might be able to at another period in time. And so as we go forward, we're going to continue to think about, one of the things we have to think about are all the students in their commencements. We also have to think about the fact that the people who are going to be rising juniors actually left and didn't have a full first year. And then we have a whole nother group of people who didn't have a first year. And then we have another group coming. And so thinking about it's not the normal cadence for us. We are trying to incorporate that in our thinking about everything from commencement to first year experience, because some people didn't have completed ones.
But to our seniors who are on the line, everybody, you're halfway there. You're actually more than halfway there when I looked at the calendar. Stay the course, please. Stay the course.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, President Burwell and Fanta. Let's move to the fall. We've gotten a lot of questions about what fall will look like in terms of when are we going to know more details about fall operations. So there's questions about fall operations in terms of housing and on campus and classes and academics. So Peter, why don't I come to you to talk a little bit about planning for classes in the fall, when students might know what formats their classes are going to be in, and how we're approaching that.
So Matt, thank you. And I'll try to answer a couple of questions that are in the chat about online as well, online options. As I mentioned before, we're expecting most of our classes to be face-to-face in the fall. There's some exceptions to that. Unless the health situation dramatically improves, we're going to be doing most of our courses that are over 50 students online simply for reasons of health and safety. Obviously, there's a universe in which the health conditions so improve that we could bring those courses more face to face. But for the moment, classes over than 50 will be scheduled online. Most of the other classes will in fact be face to face. We are trying to sort of working with the Department of Health and working with CDC Guidelines, trying to make sure that we have appropriate distancing. And so this is a very fluid operation, very fluid situation that we'll be working on over the course of the end of the spring and all the way through the summer to try to ensure safety of our folks. I will say that there are a couple of people who have asked about online courses, and this is tricky. And I'll tell you, because one of the lessons of this academic year at institutions that have been more mixed than we have, more face-to-face than we are, is that simulcast teachings, in other words, there are 18 people online, face-to-face, and 2 people online, generally has been felt not to work. So we're trying to get students who need to be all online for a variety of reasons. We're trying to get them the ability to give them a few courses that they can take so that they can progress, while most students will be face-to-face. One of the things that we really have done out of COVID is we've asked ourselves the question, is there advantage in having flexibility to take courses online for students, say, who are studying abroad? Or students who have a wonderful internship, mentored field practicum internship in another US city and can stay on track to their degree. And so one of the things that we're really working hard on is trying to figure out what are the courses, the numbers of courses and the types of courses that would allow students this kind of flexibility post-COVID. And that's a very, very important ongoing conversation. So we expect most people to be back face-to-face. Graduate students are different. Graduate students, a lot of our graduate curricula are fully online. That's a different discussion. We expect most of our undergraduate students to be back face-to-face, but we are also working on a series of offerings that will allow students who have different either health needs in the immediate term or long-term sort of experiential needs in the longer term to have options with online. So stay tuned on that one. That one is we're going to be working on that for the next several months.
Great, thank you, Peter. Dan, this next one's for you. We got a question about, do we know if the UPass will be in operation in the fall?
I like the question because it shows how popular the program is. So I've been in consultation with WMATA here in the past few weeks. I hope to have an answer, frankly, today. And as soon as I have an answer that I can confirm, I'll let the community know. But I'm very optimistic that we're going to be able to reintroduce the UPass program for fall 2021.
Great, thank you, Dan. Yeah, no, it's a very popular question we get, and I'm glad we're able to hopefully provide some information soon. Eric, why don't we come to you for your next question? I know Dr. Aw and Dan addressed some of it, but why don't we let you ask your question?
Yeah, so most of you have already really answered this question, but I will frame it in a way that is unique. So my question really has to do with, what is it going to look like, right? What is the classroom going to look like? What is housing going to look like? What is dining going to look like? Because when we talk about this transition, it's important to get sort of an imagery so that we know what to expect, especially for graduate students who don't know if their classes are in person or online until later in the summer, and they're worried about housing. So if we could just conjure up some imagery for our students, that would be very helpful.
Great question, Eric. And I often say if I had a crystal ball, I would be really rich right now, but I don't. But here are a couple of things that I believe will be the case in the fall. I do believe this piece of that there will be students, and a vast majority of students on campus, yes. I believe that very much so, yes. That we will be having a physical presence on campus, and not in the format that we currently have. Absolutely, I believe that. I think there's enough there, even with the vaccines. We keep talking about the variants, but the vaccines at least, seems to indicate that they are, covering for some of that as well. And so I do believe this physical presence piece is really going to be important in being on campus. How does that translate into classrooms? Provost Starr talked about that in the classroom and the faculty teaching and what that looks like and how important that is. The question I would say is, will it be a 3 feet distance? Possibly, or not. Maybe it could actually even be full. We don't know yet, right? But we know that there's a lot of those questions that are coming in. But even just the most recent research talked about even looking at more 3 feet based on the research. So it's to say that there will be classroom presence where you will be interacting with a faculty member and that it's not, basically with Zoom and so forth. There will still be, as Provost Starr said, there will still be some classes, like the 50 or more in some cases, that will be online. But just, to give you a sense of that, when we did an audit of main campus, how many classes fit that? 33 classes. out of thousands of classes. Because I think, our perspective matters in understanding the scope of what we're talking about. So with the 50 plus, it's about 33 out of thousands of classes are offered. Okay, so that's an example on the classroom and interaction. So questions of like, will you be sitting in the office of your advisor for one-on-one? Maybe not. But also, I think we're also finding out from students that if they have an appointment and that's the only thing that they have for that day, and if they're living off campus, that they maybe don't want to come to campus for just a half an hour appointment, and that they want to be able to have some flexibility. We will need to know and understand more about those types of things, right? Around services, and understand that we're going to have flexibility. And the flexibility is what is going to work for students, what's going to work and make sense in the quality of delivery of service and things like that. Those are questions we want to engage with you all on and understand better, while we also figure out health and safety. Then to the question of the residence hall, you already know we've put out the call for the fall, and the call has gone out for pretty much all of our buildings with doubles, right? For the fall, and we still will have at least one building for isolation because we want to plan for that. And we know a little bit what the ratio, is in this current time, and so we've planned for enough space if need be. Do I hope we will not need it? Sure, but we want to plan for that, right? So we have that. In terms of the housing, and we will be looking to hire RAs and all of those pieces, which is important to the student experience. We also know even before COVID that we didn't have enough housing on campus for our students, and that there's off-campus housing that will come up. And so we will want to continue talking with students about, renting apartments and leasing and so forth, et cetera. And I know that's one of the other reasons the UPass question keeps coming up, because transportation is important. So we know those things are going to matter and are very important for the student experience. So yes, we're going to continue to have a good number of our students who will be on campus and a good number who will be off campus. And how we make sure the campus is accessible to all is incredibly important. To the question of food, there will be meal plan. Meal plan will be mandated for first-year students and for sophomores. But other students, if they want to get on the meal plan, if they're off campus and others, certainly there'll be avenues for them to do that. And there'll be, as we're doing pickup, there'll be, the small market that's on East Campus. All of those facilities will be open. The Starbucks, all of those will be open. We want to also make sure that all of our employees are safe, including our contract workers and everybody else. They are part of the AU community. So even with our testing, we're doing testing right now of our contract workers because they're very much part of the AU family. And they're the front lines of a lot of what's happened on campus with services and so forth. So when you ask, what is the campus going to look like? I want to see the quad full with students. I want to see the building buzzing with students. We will look at health and safety first, as President Burwell said. Health and safety, but also core mission of teaching and learning is absolutely essential. And then the third component is our community, which is AU and the DC community. So that's what it's going to look like. Yes, people will probably need to be masked. Yes, they'll probably need to be taking physical distancing. Yes, we'll be pleading with everybody that you all have to be part of the solution for health and safety, and how we do that and how we abide by that and how we can continue to make sure we're all doing our parts. Those are going to be important. We also know not everybody wants to be physically here in DC, for different reasons, either because of health and safety reasons, because of family reasons, because of graduate students' job reasons, and so forth. So how we address those different needs are some of the things that we will want to continue to have very intentional discussions and problem solving around.
Great, thank you, Fanta. Peter, I want to come back to you. We've got a couple of follow-up questions in the Q&A about graduate courses, and just wanted to have you clarify a little bit about our existing graduate programs that were online before COVID, and the plan for traditional graduate courses that are normally in person in the fall.
So thank you, Matt. We have 22 graduate programs that are fully online and have always been online. Obviously, they will remain online. They have remained online through. Most graduate programs that are traditionally face-to-face, we will be expecting students to be face-to-face for that. We think pedagogically that is a strong, it's what students want. It's what pedagogically is the soundest of possible options. However great online teaching can be, there's still something, particularly in the graduate arena, there's still something very, very important about not just the dialogue with your faculty member, but the dialogue with your peers and with the people who you meet in the context of your studies. So traditional graduate programs, Matt, will be largely face-to-face.
Great, thank you, Peter. Fanta, I want to come back to you on the, building off the topics you were just talking about for the fall. We've had some questions about support services. What kind of support will be available for students, mental health support, things like that. Are we planning on having a fall break? So can you talk a little bit about that aspect of our community?
So I'll let Peter speak to the fall break because that's an academic calendar piece. And then I'm happy to talk about some of the support services.
Yes, if we can, but we are very much want a fall break if we can. See, that was easy.
Around the support services, yes. The support services that we currently have, certainly it goes without saying, will be available. And then we're looking to augment in some areas. In the mental health is one of those specific areas of how we increase support for mental health. We know the challenges before, and we know with COVID that is even more pronounced in how we do that. So those are some of the services that we will be paying very close attention to. In addition, all of the key things, the Writing Center, as the students know, academic support, all of those, AU Central, financial aid, all of those pretty much will be very much available. And really one of the things in particular that I'm interested in hearing more from the students, and certainly the leadership in those different units will be tackling that, is we really do want to understand from students what have we learned from COVID? And are there things that we've learned from COVID that students feel as we move into the next phase that they believe would be important for us to keep, and things they would like to see change, right? So particularly around the services, this is one of those questions that I have. Is telehealth going to be the future? Is that what our students will be looking to more and less, right? Something President Burwell knows a lot about in her previous role and hat along all these things. Those are questions we want to ask and understand and not necessarily fully assume, right? So how we deliver services and the modalities are things we really are very interested in hearing from students. We know one size does not fit all. We know that, but we really need to understand more. What are the different ways in which students want to engage with those, and are those things that we can pivot to? And I don't know, President Burwell, if you want to add anything to that, to those specific pieces of services and things.
No, just as we focus on this question of student and student services, and it's a little to Eric's question too, the only thing I will say is it's important that what will happen is staff and staff meetings and the staff and how that will all work will be much more, it will be shaped and driven by the student issues. So in other words, we will not have meetings most likely face-to-face for our staff because we need every space possible for student experience, both in terms of academic or gathering. So we will limit the abilities of the staff going back to certain practices in terms of meetings and that sort of thing, certainly in the fall, and we'll see if we need to do it through the spring. What things will be based on are things like student services. The staff will need to be present for because student services are the priority. So as we think about all of this question of student services and meeting the needs of our students are going to be the priority in terms of how we do decision making of what the ramp looks like for the whole community. It will be around ensuring that we have the classroom space, we have the gathering spaces as much as we can in terms of how our students like to both gather, study, do those kinds of things, and that we have the staff that are an important part of what is the AU experience in terms of whether that's making sure, career, we switched to digital, but making sure that those kinds of things are there and available for the students. That's the only thing I would add.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, President Burwell. In the conversation about community and support, Tim, why don't I come to you for your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for inviting us to join you this afternoon. So I think Dr. Aw started a little bit into my question, and it's about lessons that we've learned over this past year. We have learned a lot of lessons and we have a lot that we still don't know. But one thing that I would like to ask is, what of the lessons have we learned that we'll be able to see in the future value proposition for American university students at all levels, including the graduate and WCL level, in terms of how that applies to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, as we've seen a monumental shift in access and demands for education across the country. Thank you.
So, Tim, I'll start, and then others can join in. And thank you. I want to thank Tim, Eric, and Kevin for your questions today, but your questions more than today, because we get your questions that are the questions of your of the students on a regular basis, and want to thank you for those questions that pressing and all that you all do in that, not just the questions today, but the questions every day from you all, in terms of making sure that we are understanding what students, our graduate students, our law school, and our undergraduates are thinking. As we think about the learnings, one of the, and how we think about what we did right in this period and how we take things forward, a couple things. One thing I would say is it was so important that we have a strategy, and a strategy that we all had contributed to in terms of, students, faculty, staff. We had a strategy going in that was something that was about our values and where we think we are going. And having that as an anchor has been an important thing, and it relates to some of the issues that we're talking about. I think everyone knows that we were very fortunate that, like, the week that we all went online, our chief digital officer started, because we had been thinking about how we were going to think about those things. And that's been something that has been helpful as we think about it. Our inclusive excellence work was in our strategy, several years ago, and actually was even ahead of the strategy. It was an element of the strategy that came even before the strategy. We know there's a tremendous amount of work to do in the equity space. And in all the issues that we're working on. But having those core elements of the strategy, there are parts of our strategy that got accelerated by COVID instead of slowed down in the digital space. And Peter was talking about some of the pilots that we'll do as we think about piloting things to think about the experience. Similarly, we're going to, I think our work in inclusive excellence and equity issues was accelerated by not just COVID, but the events of the summer. And as we think about how racial justice came to the fore in our country, and hopefully a way that will build more momentum for us as an institution, but also around the country more broadly. So I think those are important things in terms of, so what comes from all of this. The other thing that I would say that we cannot lose is how we worked as a community. And I had not seen, the community coming together. We saw a nimbleness in terms of getting through challenges. And we saw the way the community came together in terms of how we sought and got input. Today's session, I hope, is a way in which we think about doing things as we go forward. We had a meeting for the whole community, and then parts of the community had opportunities to talk about their issues and ask their questions. And this communication that we've been doing. Matt, I think it was, have I done 54?
Yep, that's correct. The last one was number 54,
so
and counting.
The communications with the community in terms of what we know and what we don't know, having the site like fall feedback, so that there's a place where people know to go, so that we can hear and that they know where to go. And the equity issues, I think, have been highlighted. And it was one thing that, I'm happy that the community came together so we could do things like, I think you all know that as a community, we paid our contractors health care, even though they weren't able to be on campus in the dining halls, or many of them were not cleaning. There was cleaning going on, but it was reduced because the students weren't living here. And we were able to pay, and we were able to also protect our employees who were 40,000 and under from any of the things that would have impacted their income. And so some of the equity issues came out that way. Our alumni came together as you all were leaving, as all the students were leaving, to put together funds, because for some students that was a challenging thing to figure out how to do that. In terms of making sure that we're thinking through equity issues for our entire community. Or with the technology, we know that was a challenge. And so, how OIT came together to put together and have a specific place where we could block and tackle, whether that was access to the internet or actually hardware or software or whatever the needs were, so that we were putting those front and center. And so, Tim, what I think we need to do is take those practices and those approaches as we continue forward. We know there's work. We know that even though we did those things, there's more work. We get that. We're clear, and it's about having these conversations, understanding where the work needs to be done and moving forward. Don't know if Fanta or Peter, you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think President Burwell covered the major one. I think the only other thing I would say, Tim, is that one thing we have learned from the pandemic is that we have to accelerate the pace of this work, right? I mean, I think there's all the signals are there and more that we have to accelerate the pace of the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and particularly the equity piece, right? So that's one thing. And so the measures that have been in place, how do we institute those and sustain those, I think becomes important. What else is there a sense of urgency to focus on? I think some of the curricular pieces for sure. There's been, the plan talks a lot about some of the curricular pieces, and Peter can talk much more about that. So those are things that we do know, right? We know that, and we know issues of affordability and accessibility and access to higher education will be with us and are going to be front and center of the minds of every institutions, including AU. And so our financial aid, all of these different pieces becomes important. And also, as President Burwell maybe mentioned as well, our campaign becomes important. Like, where will our campaign focus on, along with the strategy, right? Scholarships, dollars, and things like that are things that we know are going to be really important from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective if we're going to increase access and so forth. So those are some of the key things concretely that I would say have come up. Is the curricular, it's the services, is how we understand equity, and how we remain very, very focused on those.
Fanta, I just want to do a shout out about the campaign. Our Development and Alumni Relations Office has been working very hard and making great progress towards the campaign. The urgency towards more new scholarships for undergraduates and graduates has never been stronger. And we're seeing our alumni and others step up for that. That's a long-term play. You don't turn scholarships around overnight, but it's the long-term belief in the value of this institution from our community, be it an alumni community or friends of the university, that is absolutely critical. Tim, thanks for the question. I spoke a little bit about flexibility in terms of offerings and the ability to take AU classes around the world or around the country. As one form of flexibility. Another form of flexibility that we're getting much better at is, for example, doing asynchronous content in a class that has problem-based learning attached to it. It's becoming much the norm and the expectation in technical fields like economics and mathematics and statistics, and we're moving very quickly in that direction. Let me do a slight segue and say not just so much lessons learned, but the things that we've been able to do that we've not wanted to do. We've not been able to do up until now, but we're now able to do thanks to Sylvia's leadership, thanks to CFO Doug Kravitz's leadership, thanks to Fanta's leadership, that are really going to make a difference for our students. And I'll give you two examples. The first is living learning communities. We have living learning communities for our first-year students now through University College Honors, CBRS, and others. We are piloting this year 7 living learner communities for sophomores. This is something that we've wanted to do for a very long time. We know that the honors students and the CBRS students haven't had the opportunity to have this in their first year. We're giving it to them in the second year. What we're also piloting is living learning communities around specific subjects, international studies, the arts, and many, many more. So this is a new pilot for next year. We are also, and I'm very pleased to say, offering for the very first time financial aid for summer courses for students who are not in 3-year programs. So the university, as you've read in President Burwell's communication, has put aside $1.27 million for students in regular courses of study to get financial aid over this summer. We believe that summer is an extraordinary opportunity for students because they can take courses in the summer and then perhaps do an experiential learning opportunity in the fall or spring, or they can graduate in 3 years or do a BA, MA, BS, MS in an accelerated period of time. So we're putting the financial aid forth this summer for students. So we're very much hoping that people sort of take a look at our summer offerings and consider hanging on and taking a course or two in the summer. Students don't take a full course array of courses normally in the summer. Folks usually take 1 or 2 courses, but it really does add, and it keeps you on track and gives you some flexibility down the line towards graduation.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Fanta. We are just about out of time. We know there's a number of questions that we did not get to, and we'll be continuing to update the information on our FAQs and elsewhere on the website. Thank you for submitting so many great questions. Not enough time in the day to get to all of them here, but you can also continue sending them to the fallfeedback@american.edu email address, and we'll continue going through those and providing information throughout the various channels and as we go forward. So with that, let me turn it back to President Burwell for some closing comments.
Thank you, Matt. And for those of you who don't know, Matt is an Eagle, another alum. We've got Dr. Aw, who is a triple Eagle, and Matt is an Eagle as well. I just want to close by, again, saying thank you to you all for your patience, for your perseverance, for your being active members of our community in terms of both doing what you came here to American University to do, but also being a part of the community. And you've shown that in so many different ways. And we really do appreciate it. And just want to make sure you know how excited we are to have you back. I can't wait to see you all on campus again. It makes a difference because it really is so much about what our work is about. And we get to Zoom and see you and that sort of thing, but it really is different when you are on this campus and we see you and see we can feel it much more in terms of your journey and your trajectory when we are physically able to be around. And so we're looking very much forward to it, but want to express real appreciation for you all, those especially who came to hear and learn and ask the questions and contribute to the dialogue that shapes where we go and what we do. So thank you all so much, and I'll look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you.